Oh, what a lovely day it was when humanity decided to knock on the galaxy's door. You know how first impressions go, right? Well, Earth's went about as smoothly as a meteor collision with a kindergarten. The Galactic Coalition had been watching humanity for decades, watching, judging, and apparently placing bets on how spectacularly we'd fail their little entrance exam. Picture the most exclusive country club in the universe, except instead of golf handicaps, they measured your worth by how many skulls you could crush per minute. The Coalition station hung in space like a metallic tumor, all sharp edges and aggressive architecture that screamed, "We eat lesser species for breakfast." Which, come to think of it, they probably did. Literally. Jamie stood on the observation deck of Earth's diplomatic vessel, staring at that monument to galactic testosterone with the kind of expression usually reserved for tax audits. At 5 feet 6 inches and possessing all the physical intimidation of a librarian with seasonal allergies, he was humanity's chosen representative. Because apparently, the universe has a sense of humor darker than a black hole's event horizon. "You sure about this, Jamie?" Captain Morris asked, his weathered face creased with worry. The man had seen combat in 3 different wars, but even he looked nervous about what was coming. "Sure," Jamie laughed, adjusting his diplomatic uniform that hung on his frame like a deflated balloon. "Morris, I'm about as sure as a penguin at a polar bear convention. But here we are." Ambassador Diane paced behind them, her heels clicking against the deck with the rhythm of an execution countdown. The Coalition's terms were clear. Pass the pact trials, and Earth gets membership, protection, and access to galactic trade routes. Fail. She didn't need to finish that sentence. They all knew what happened to species that failed. The galaxy was littered with their bones. The docking procedure felt like being swallowed by some cosmic predator. Warning lights bathed everything in blood red, and the station's artificial gravity hit them like a sledgehammer. Jamie stumbled slightly. Not exactly the entrance of a galactic conqueror. Admiral Korath was waiting in the main corridor, and sweet, merciful stars. He was everything nightmares were made of. 8 feet of scaled muscle, claws that could open cans or jugulars with equal efficiency, and eyes like molten gold that seemed to count exactly how many ways he could dismember a person. His species, the Sorothrax, had conquered half the galaxy before breakfast and the other half before lunch. "So," Korath's voice rumbled like an avalanche with a speech impediment, "Earth sends us this?" The insult hung in the air, like a bad smell. Jamie felt the weight of every Coalition species' gaze. The towering crushers with their stone-like hides, the razor-sharp blade runners, the cybernetic warheads. Each one looked like they bench-pressed starships for fun. "I'm Jamie," he said, extending his hand in what was either diplomacy or the galaxy's most polite suicide attempt. "Earth's diplomatic representative." Korath stared at the offered hand like it was a particularly unimpressive appetizer. "Diplomatic representative? How quaint. Tell me, little human, can you even lift a weapon?" "Well, I once carried groceries up 3 flights of stairs without stopping," Jamie replied with a smile that was either brave or completely insane. "Does that count?" The silence that followed was so thick you could have carved it into sculptures. Then Korath threw back his massive head and laughed, the sound like a fusion reactor having a nervous breakdown. "Oh, this will be entertaining. Very well, small one. Let us begin the pack trials." The first trial was called Strength of Arms, which sounded pleasant until they led Jamie into an arena that looked like it had been designed by someone with serious anger management issues. The task was simple. Lift the Coalition standard, a metallic pole that weighed roughly the same as a small moon. Jamie approached it with all the confidence of a goldfish attempting rocket science. He wrapped his hands around the base, took a deep breath, and pulled. Nothing happened. He tried again, his face turning red with effort. Still nothing. On his 3rd attempt, he managed to lift it approximately 1 millimeter before his arms gave out entirely. The audience's reaction was immediate and brutal. Laughter erupted from the Coalition representatives, deep, rumbling guffaws that shook the station's superstructure. Someone in the crowd shouted something in an alien language that probably translated to "pathetic weakling" in at least 18 different dialects. Korath shook his head with theatrical disappointment. Next trial. The speed of combat trial went about as well as you'd expect. Jamie was given a practice sword that felt like it had been forged from collapsed star matter and told to demonstrate his fighting prowess against a training dummy. The dummy, it turned out, fought back, with laser weapons and rocket fists, and what appeared to be a very personal grudge against anything human-shaped. Jamie spent most of the trial running in circles, occasionally swinging his sword at empty air while the dummy systematically destroyed his dignity. He managed to land exactly one hit, accidentally, while falling backward in what was definitely not a tactical maneuver. Is this a joke? General Brutok, a crusher who looked like he'd been carved from living granite, turned to his companions. Are they mocking us? Perhaps, Commander Scythia hissed through her razor-sharp teeth. This is Earth's way of surrendering before the real fighting begins. The final trial was Wisdom of War, a strategic simulation where Jamie was supposed to command coalition forces in a mock battle. The holographic interface lit up with thousands of ships, each one representing massive firepower and tactical possibilities. Jamie stared at the display for a long moment, then began moving units around the board. His strategy was unique. Instead of the standard hammer and anvil tactics favored by the coalition, Jamie spread his forces thin, seemingly abandoning strategic positions and creating what looked like random chaos. The simulation ran for exactly 4 minutes before his entire fleet was obliterated in a spectacular display of tactical incompetence. The arena fell silent except for the quiet hum of ventilation systems and the sound of Jamie's ragged breathing. Korath rose from his observation throne, his massive form casting shadows that seemed to swallow light itself. In all my cycles of service to the coalition, I have never witnessed such a pathetic display of weakness. The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Jamie stood in the center of the arena, small and alone, while hundreds of galactic predators looked down at him with a mixture of contempt and amusement. Earth, Korath continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, is rejected. Your species lacks the strength to survive in civilized space. You are prey animals masquerading as hunters. The coalition has no use for weaklings who would drag down the pack. The rejection was formal, final, and broadcast across every inhabited system in the galaxy. Earth, humanity, was officially designated as unworthy of protection or recognition. Fair game for any species looking for easy conquest or slave labor. Jamie nodded slowly, as if he'd expected nothing different. I understand, Admiral. Thank you for the opportunity. Remove this creature from my sight, Korath commanded, and let word spread throughout the galaxy. Earth produces nothing but cowards and fools. As Jamie was escorted back to the human vessel, the coalition representatives were already discussing humanity's fate. Some suggested immediate conquest. Others proposed simply ignoring Earth until a more enterprising species decided to claim it. All agreed on one thing. Humanity was finished before it had even begun. The journey back to Earth was quieter than a funeral in space. Diane stared out at the stars with hollow eyes, already calculating how many years they had before someone came to collect their planet. Morris worked frantically on defensive preparations that they all knew would be utterly useless. And Jamie? Jamie sat in his quarters, supposedly writing his resignation letter. Because that's what failures did, right? They slunk away into obscurity, forgotten footnotes in the galaxy's great story. But here's the thing about assumptions. They make an ass out of you and, well, everyone else too. 2 weeks after returning to Earth, Jamie submitted his resignation to President Rachel and Ambassador Diane. Standard procedure for diplomatic disasters. Then he boarded a small, unremarkable transport ship with supplies for what he claimed was a personal sabbatical to process the failure. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? The man who had single-handedly humiliated humanity wanted to disappear. Good riddance. Earth had bigger problems to worry about, like preparing for the inevitable invasion that would come now that they were officially designated as galactic bottom feeders. The transport ship disappeared into the vast emptiness between stars, carrying its cargo of one supposedly broken man and enough supplies to last several months. Where was he going? Nobody asked. What was he planning? Nobody cared. After all, what could the galaxy's most spectacular failure possibly accomplish out there in the dark? As it turned out, quite a lot. But that's getting ahead of ourselves, isn't it? The coalition had made their judgment. Humanity was weak. Jamie was pathetic. Earth was doomed. They were absolutely right about one thing, though. Jamie had failed the pack trials completely and utterly. He'd failed them so thoroughly, so spectacularly, that it almost looked intentional. But surely that was giving him too much credit. Right? Right? 5 years is a long time in galactic politics. Long enough for the Coalition to forget about one failed human diplomat. Long enough for Earth to build what defenses it could and pray to whatever gods were listening. Long enough for the galaxy to move on to more interesting prey. But 5 years is also long enough for a very determined person to travel to some very interesting places. The Outer Rim was where the galaxy kept its dirty secrets, forgotten worlds, failed experiments, and species that didn't quite fit the Coalition's narrow definition of worthy. It was also where you'd find Jamie if you knew where to look, which, thankfully, nobody did. His ship had seen better decades. The transport vessel he'd left Earth with had been extensively modified. Extended fuel tanks, upgraded sensors, and a cargo hold that had been converted into something between a diplomatic suite and a mobile command center. Jamie had learned that you could buy almost anything on the Rim if you had the right currency. And apparently, Coalition rejection letters were worth their weight in rare metals to certain parties. Another dead end? Asked Finn, Jamie's recently acquired pilot, and the first human to join what was becoming a very unusual recruiting mission. The man was everything Jamie wasn't. Tall, muscular, and possessed of the kind of roguish charm that made people trust him with their starships and their daughters. He'd been exiled from Coalition space for the crime of excessive independent thinking, which was apparently a capital offense these days. Not dead, Jamie replied, studying the sensor readings from the planet below. Just well hidden. The world was officially designated as Barren Class No Strategic Value in Coalition databases. Unofficially, it was home to the Whisper Folk, a species of ethereal beings whose crime against galactic civilization was being telepathic pacifists. The Coalition had tried to conscript them as military communication specialists. When the Whisper Folk refused to participate in warfare, they were branded as defective and abandoned. The landing was rougher than Jamie would have preferred, but his pilot skills had improved considerably over the past few years. Survival was a powerful teacher, and the Outer Rim was a harsh classroom. The delegation that met them wasn't quite what you'd expect from supposedly defective beings. They moved like liquid silver, barely touching the ground, and their communication was unique. "Welcome, small seeker." The voice appeared directly in Jamie's mind, warm and oddly comforting. "We have been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Jamie asked aloud, earning a confused look from Finn, who apparently wasn't receiving the mental broadcast. For someone who understands that strength comes in many forms, the speaker materialized more solidly, still translucent, but recognizable as vaguely humanoid. Their features shifted like smoke, but their presence was absolutely real. "I am called Whisper Song. We have watched your journey with interest. You've been watching me? We watch all things, Seeker. It is our nature. But you are different. You failed the Coalition trials not from weakness, but from wisdom." Jamie felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What do you mean?" The Whisper Folk had a way of laughing that felt like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You performed exactly poorly enough to be dismissed as harmless, but not so poorly as to be killed outright. A careful balance that speaks to deep planning." Finn looked between Jamie and empty air with growing concern. Boss? You're having a conversation with yourself again." "Not exactly." Jamie focused his thoughts, trying to project them as he'd learned to do over the past few years. The Whisper Folk were excellent teachers when you found them. "Whisper Song, I have a proposition for you." "Oh, we know your proposition, small seeker. You wish to build an alliance of the rejected, to prove that the Coalition's definition of strength is flawed. And we have been waiting 16 cycles for someone to ask. The recruitment process was unconventional. Jamie didn't offer military might or promises of conquest. Instead, he talked about complementary abilities, mutual support, and a different way of approaching galactic civilization. The Whisper Folk listened with the patience of beings who thought in centuries rather than years. "Your plan has merit," Whisper Song eventually concluded. "But plans require more than telepaths and dreamers. You will need builders. Which was how Jamie found himself 3 months later on a world that the Coalition had designated as architecturally interesting but strategically useless. The builders were a species of organic engineers who could shape matter at the molecular level, essentially living 3D printers with artistic souls. Their crime? They refused to build weapons. Absolutely not, Architect declared when Jamie finished his pitch. The being looked like someone had crossed a spider with a construction crane and given it a philosophy degree. We create, not destroy. I'm not asking you to build weapons, Jamie replied patiently. I'm asking you to build defenses, shields, barriers, things that protect rather than harm. And what happens when your enemies breach those defenses? Then we adapt, build better defenses, find new solutions. Architect's multiple arms gestured in patterns that might have been skepticism or artistic expression. The Coalition conquers through force. How do you propose to counter that without matching their violence? Jamie smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had been growing sharper over 5 years of wandering. By making force irrelevant. The builders were intrigued. Enough to listen, enough to consider, and eventually, enough to join. The pattern continued across dozens of worlds. The thinkers, a species of pure intellectuals whose bodies had evolved away to almost nothing, leaving behind vast minds that could calculate possibilities faster than quantum computers. Their crime? They'd proven mathematically that the Coalition's expansion was unsustainable and would lead to galactic collapse within 2 centuries. Logic Weaver was their representative, a being who existed mostly as organized energy with just enough physical presence to operate communication equipment. Your proposal is statistically unlikely to succeed, she informed Jamie in a voice like digital wind. What are the exact odds? Accounting for all variables, approximately 1 chance in 8,436. And what are the odds of survival if we do nothing? A pause. Calculations that would have burned out normal computers. 0. Then I like our chances. The recruitment wasn't always successful. Some species were too broken, too afraid, or too set in their ways to consider alternatives. Others had been so ground down by Coalition oppression that they couldn't see past their own survival. But enough said yes. Enough were willing to take a chance on a different way. By the end of the 4th year, Jamie's network included 38 different species across 26 star systems. None of them were warriors in the traditional sense. None would have passed the Coalition's pack trials. But together, they were becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. You realize, Finn said one evening as they traveled between systems, that we're essentially building a rebellion using the galaxy's rejects and cast-offs. Jamie nodded, studying star charts that showed trade routes, communication networks, and Coalition patrol patterns. The best kind of rebellion, nobody expects the weaklings to fight back. And if you're wrong? If your grand strategy doesn't work? Jamie looked up from his calculations, and Finn was struck by how much the man had changed over the past few years. Still small, still physically unimposing, but there was something in his eyes now. A cold intelligence that spoke of plans within plans within plans. Then we die as free beings instead of living as slaves, Jamie said simply. But I don't think I'm wrong. The news, when it came, wasn't entirely unexpected. Coalition forces were massing near Earth. Invasion preparations had begun. Humanity had approximately 6 months before the hammer fell. Jamie received the intelligence report through the network he'd spent 5 years building. Whispered conversations carried by telepaths, calculations performed by vast intellects, observations recorded by species that existed in dimensions the Coalition couldn't even perceive. So, Finn said, reading over Jamie's shoulder. Time to find out if your grand plan actually works? Jamie was already moving, pulling up communication arrays and contact lists that spanned half the galaxy. Send word to all network nodes. Operation Homecoming begins now. Operation Homecoming? The pack rejected the smallest cub, Jamie said, his fingers flying over controls with practiced efficiency. Time to show them what that cub learned while wandering in the wild. Across the outer rim, on forgotten worlds and abandoned stations, the galaxy's rejects began to move. Ships that had been hidden in asteroid fields powered up their engines. Beings that had been dismissed as worthless began demonstrating exactly why the coalition had been afraid of them in the first place. The Whisper folk wove a communication network that spanned light years in real time. The builders began constructing devices that bent the laws of physics into new and interesting shapes. The thinkers calculated approach vectors, defensive positions, and tactical possibilities with supernatural precision. And at the center of it all, Jamie sat in his modified transport ship and smiled. It was time to go home. But first, he had one more stop to make, one more recruitment pitch to deliver. And this one was going to be very, very personal. After all, he'd learned something important during his time in exile. Sometimes the best way to win was to let your enemy think they'd already won. The coalition was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Earth had never looked so beautiful or so doomed. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the inevitable Conquest, watching the small blue world turn lazily in space ahead of his fleet. 300 coalition warships hung in formation around him, enough firepower to crack planets and reshape star systems, more than adequate for dealing with one backward world of primitive mammals. Surface scans confirm minimal defensive capabilities, Commander Scythia reported, her razor teeth gleaming with anticipation. Orbital platforms, some missile arrays, energy shields around major population centers, nothing that would trouble a single battle group, much less our full fleet. General Brutok cracked his stone knuckles with sounds like avalanches. How long for the conquest, Admiral? Perhaps an hour, Korath replied dismissively. Maybe 2, if they're particularly stubborn about dying. We'll leave enough survivors for labor purposes, naturally. It had been 5 years since that pathetic human diplomat had failed so spectacularly at the Pact trials. 5 years for Earth to build whatever defenses it could manage. 5 years to prepare for the inevitable. Korath almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The coalition had grown impatient with letting Earth exist unmolested. Other species were beginning to whisper that perhaps the mighty coalition was going soft, allowing weaklings to occupy valuable real estate. Bad for the reputation. Bad for business. Time to remind the galaxy what happened to prey that forgot its place. Begin the assault, Korath commanded. Target military installations first, then— Admiral, his sensor officer interrupted, sounding confused. I'm detecting hyperspace signatures. Multiple contacts emerging from jump at grid reference 26 Mark 8. Korath turned toward the tactical display, expecting to see a few desperate Earth vessels attempting some sort of heroic last stand. Instead, his golden eyes widened at what the sensors showed. Ships, hundreds of them. Thousands of them. A fleet that seemed to stretch across half the solar system, emerging from hyperspace with the coordinated precision of a military parade. But these weren't the angular, aggressive designs favored by proper warrior species. These ships looked wrong. Organic curves mixed with geometric impossibilities. Vessels that seemed to phase in and out of visible reality. Craft that appeared to be constructed from crystallized music and organized light. What are those? Commander Scythia breathed, her usual predatory confidence wavering. The answer came in the form of a transmission that bypassed every communication protocol known to coalition science. The signal appeared directly on their screens, accompanied by a voice that was irritatingly familiar. Hello, Admiral Korath? Miss me? Jamie appeared on the main display, but he was different. Still physically unimposing, still wearing that same infuriating smile. But he was surrounded by beings that shouldn't exist. Translucent figures that moved like liquid dreams, spider-like creatures that seemed to be rebuilding reality as they worked, and energy patterns that might have been sentient mathematics. Impossible, Korath snarled. You're dead. Earth rejected you. The galaxy forgot you. Oh, the galaxy tried to forget me, Jamie replied cheerfully. But I've been busy making new friends. Let me introduce you to the reject fleet. Every species you've ever dismissed, abandoned, or written off as useless. Turns out, when you put all the worthless pieces together, they make something rather interesting. General Brutok laughed, a sound like continents colliding. You think a fleet of cowards and weaklings can challenge the coalition? We are the apex predators of the galaxy. Apex predators, Jamie mused. Yes, I remember that speech. Very intimidating. There's just one tiny problem with apex predators, though. And what's that? Jamie's smile sharpened. They're really bad at adapting when the environment changes. Whisper song, if you would? The change was subtle at first. Coalition ship sensors began reporting impossible readings. Enemy vessels that were simultaneously in 3 different locations. Weapons systems that fired around corners. Defensive shields that seemed to exist in more dimensions than physics allowed. What's happening to our targeting computers? Commander Cethia demanded. They appear to be confused, the sensor officer reported. Enemy positions are being transmitted directly to our systems, but the data is contradictory. Ships that are here and not here simultaneously. The Whisper folk had spent 5 years learning coalition communication protocols and computer systems. Now they were feeding the enemy fleet information that was technically accurate but completely useless. Quantum superpositions of location that made targeting impossible, while maintaining perfect coordination among their own forces. Fire anyway, Korath roared. Blanket bombardment. Destroy everything. The coalition fleet opened fire with enough energy to sterilize solar systems. Thousands of missiles and energy beams lanced through space toward the reject fleet. And every single shot missed. Not by much. Just enough. Weapons that should have obliterated targets instead passed through spaces where ships had been nanoseconds before. It was like watching someone try to hit smoke with a hammer. Technically possible, but requiring more precision than reality allowed. How? General Brutok demanded. Jamie's voice came through the chaos, calm and conversational. The thinkers calculate probabilities faster than your weapons can fire. The Whisper folk coordinate movements before your targeting computers can lock on. And the builders... He paused dramatically. Well, they've been making some improvements to physics itself. That's when Korath noticed the space around Earth changing. Not obviously, just small alterations in how light bent, how energy flowed, how matter interacted with itself. The builders had spent 5 years studying coalition weapons and defenses. Now, they were implementing upgrades to local reality that made traditional warfare problematic. Energy beams curved away from their targets like water finding easier paths. Missiles forgot what they were supposed to explode. Armor plating developed sudden, inexplicable preferences for specific types of damage. Unfortunately, not the types the Coalition was inflicting. This is impossible, Commander Cethia shrieked. Physics doesn't work this way. Physics works however the universe decides it works, Jamie replied. You just never bothered asking nicely. Logic Weaver, please show them our second demonstration. The reject fleet moved with impossible coordination. Ships flowing through space like schools of fish, guided by a single consciousness. But they weren't attacking, not directly. Instead, they were rearranging things. Coalition vessels found themselves surrounded by geometric patterns that shouldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. Weapons systems began displaying error messages in languages that predated written history. Navigation computers started calculating courses through dimensions that didn't technically exist, but somehow led to very real destinations. Admiral, the communications officer reported with barely controlled panic, fleet cohesion is breaking down. Ships are reporting system malfunctions across all categories. Some vessels are... I don't know how to describe it. Some vessels are trying to evolve. Korath watched in horror as his perfect military formation dissolved into chaos. Ships designed for war were being gently convinced to consider alternative career paths. Weapon systems were developing consciences. Armor plating was questioning the ethics of protecting violence. Fall back, he commanded. All ships establish defensive perimeter around the flagship. But the Coalition fleet was discovering something interesting about fighting an enemy that included telepaths, reality sculptors, and beings that existed partially outside normal space-time. Traditional military tactics were approximately as useful as a chocolate teapot in a supernova. You know what the really funny part is? Jamie's voice continued, still cheerful despite commanding what appeared to be the systematic dismantling of galactic civilization as they knew it. I actually tried to warn you about this. What are you talking about? Korath snarled. The Pack trials. My strategic simulation. I didn't fail because I was incompetent. I failed because I was showing you exactly what would happen if you ever faced an enemy that didn't play by your rules. The memory hit Korath like a physical blow. That chaotic, seemingly random deployment of forces during Jamie's trial. The strategy that had looked like complete tactical incompetence. But now he was watching that same strategy implemented on a galactic scale. And it was working. Impossible, he whispered. Improbable, Jamie corrected. But then again, we specialize in improbable things. The beautiful part about being dismissed as worthless is that nobody expects you to suddenly become priceless. The Coalition's mighty fleet was in full retreat now, but retreat required knowing which direction was away from the enemy. When the enemy included beings that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously and could be in multiple locations at once, the concept of away became somewhat negotiable. Jamie. A new voice cut through the communications chaos. President Rachel, speaking from Earth's surface. What? How did you... Is that really you? Hello, Madam President. Sorry I'm late for the party. Had to pick up a few friends on the way. Korath watched his invincible armada being systematically outmaneuvered by an enemy that shouldn't exist, using tactics that violated every principle of warfare ever developed. Ships that had conquered 1,000 worlds were fleeing from opponents who fought by rewriting the rules of engagement in real time. This isn't over, he growled into the communication channel. Jamie's laughter was warm, genuine, and absolutely terrifying. Oh, Admiral, it's barely begun. The last thing Korath saw before his flagship jumped to hyperspace was Jamie's small, unremarkable transport ship hovering peacefully in Earth's orbit, surrounded by an impossible fleet of impossible allies who had just proved that the galaxy's understanding of power was about to change forever. The pack had rejected the smallest cub. Now the cub was teaching the pack what rejection really looked like. The Coalition's retreat wasn't the organized withdrawal of a disciplined military force. It was a rout. Ships fleeing in every direction like startled prey animals, their formations shattered, their legendary coordination reduced to panicked static across emergency frequencies. Admiral Korath's flagship, the inevitable Conquest, limped through hyperspace with half its systems displaying error messages in languages that shouldn't exist. The name felt like mockery now. Nothing about this conquest had been inevitable except its spectacular failure. Damage report, Korath demanded, his golden eyes fixed on tactical displays that kept showing impossible readings. 60% of our fleet has scattered across 3 sectors, Commander Cynthia replied, her usual predatory confidence replaced by something uncomfortably close to fear. The ships that remained, Admiral, they're requesting permission to defect. Defect? General Brutock's stone features cracked with disbelief. To whom? Those weaklings don't even have a proper military. That's exactly why they want to defect, Scythia said quietly. Half our crews are asking how they can join an alliance that wins battles without firing a shot. Korath turned away from the displays, his mind reeling. In one engagement, if it could even be called an engagement, the Coalition's reputation as the galaxy's apex predators had been destroyed. Worse, they'd been defeated by everything they'd spent centuries dismissing as worthless. The communication array crackled to life with an incoming transmission. Jamie's face appeared on the screen, still wearing that infuriating smile, still looking like he should be organizing library books rather than commanding fleets. Admiral Korath, I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss. You ... Korath's voice was a low growl. What are you? Still the same diplomat who failed your trials 5 years ago, Jamie replied cheerfully. Though I'll admit, I've learned a few things since then. Would you like to meet in person? I think it's time we had a proper conversation. The rendezvous point was neutral space, halfway between Earth and Coalition territory. Korath's shuttle approached the coordinates with every sensor active, expecting some sort of trap. Instead, he found Jamie's original transport ship, still modest, still unremarkable, floating peacefully among the stars with only a single escort vessel that looked like it had been designed by beings who existed partially in dreams. The docking bay was unsettling. Not threatening, exactly, but wrong in ways that made Korath's warrior instincts scream warnings. The walls seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them, and the air tasted of possibilities that shouldn't exist. Jamie was waiting in what had once been a cargo hold, but now resembled something between a diplomatic meeting room and a philosopher's study. Books from dozens of worlds lined the walls, many in languages Korath recognized, others in scripts that seemed to move when observed. "Admiral," Jamie said, rising from a simple chair. "Thank you for coming." Korath studied the human with eyes that had learned to read danger in 1,000 forms. This wasn't the same broken diplomat who had fled Earth 5 years ago. This was something else entirely. Still physically unimposing, still seemingly harmless, but radiating a quiet confidence that spoke of plans within plans within plans. "Explain," Korath demanded. "Explain how you did this." Jamie gestured to another chair. "Please, sit. This conversation has been 5 years in the making." "Answer me." "I am." Jamie's tone remained patient. "But understanding requires context. You asked me once if I could even lift a weapon. The answer was no, I couldn't. But that was never the right question." Korath remained standing, every muscle tense for combat. Then what was the right question? The right question was, what happens to a galaxy built on the assumption that might makes right when someone proves that assumption wrong? Jamie moved to a wall display showing star charts, but these weren't normal navigation maps. They showed connections, relationships, flows of influence and cooperation that spanned the galaxy like neural networks. "You want to know how I built this alliance?" It was simple. I went to everyone you'd rejected and asked them a single question. What can you do that nobody expects? The Whisper folk could communicate instantly across any distance. The Builders could reshape matter itself. The Thinkers could calculate possibilities faster than reality could change them. Alone, each was useless by your standards. Together they're still weak, Korath snarled. Physical weakness, genetic weakness. Admiral. Jamie's interruption was gentle but firm. "Do you know what happened during my strategic simulation 5 years ago?" The question seemed to come from nowhere. "You failed. Spectacularly. I showed you exactly what would happen if the Coalition ever faced an enemy that didn't follow your rules. I deployed forces in patterns that looked like chaos, but were actually designed to counter every standard Coalition tactic. I demonstrated strategies based on cooperation instead of domination, flexibility instead of rigid hierarchy, adaptation instead of brute force." Korath's golden eyes narrowed. "Impossible. You were incompetent, terrified. I was performing." Jamie's smile was sad now, tinged with something that might have been regret. "The pack trials weren't a test of strength, Admiral. They were a trap, a way to identify and eliminate potential threats before they became dangerous. Anyone who showed real tactical brilliance, true strategic thinking, or the ability to inspire others would have been marked for termination." The words hit Korath like physical blows. "You're lying." "Am I? Think about it. In all the years of pack trials, how many species have actually passed? How many potential allies have been admitted to the Coalition as equals rather than subjects?" Silence stretched between them. Korath's mind raced through decades of trials, remembering the results. The strong had been recruited as soldiers. The clever had been recruited as technicians. The wise had been eliminated. "You knew," Korath breathed. "From the beginning, you knew." "I suspected. The trials were designed to test for exactly the qualities that would make a species dangerous to Coalition hegemony. So I failed them. Deliberately, carefully, in exactly the way that would make me appear harmless while giving me the freedom to build something new." Jamie turned back to the star charts, his finger tracing paths between systems that had never been connected before. 5 years, Admiral. 5 years to find every species you'd cast aside, every world you'd abandoned, every individual who didn't fit your narrow definition of useful. 5 years to prove that your greatest strength, the ability to dismiss what you don't understand, was also your greatest weakness. What do you want? Korath's voice was barely controlled fury. What I've always wanted. A galaxy where strength comes from cooperation instead of conquest. Where different doesn't mean inferior. Where the pack succeeds because it values every member, not just the alphas. Impossible. The strong rule the weak. That's natural law. Jamie laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine warmth. Admiral, you just watched natural law get rewritten by beings who exist partially outside normal spacetime. Impossible is a word that's lost most of its meaning. Korath found himself sitting despite his intention to remain standing. The implications of what Jamie was saying were staggering. You're talking about revolution, the complete overthrow of galactic civilization. I'm talking about evolution. The coalition served its purpose. It brought stability to the galaxy through strength. But strength without wisdom leads to stagnation. Stagnation leads to decay. And decay, ... Jamie gestured toward space where coalition ships continued their scattered retreat. Leads to exactly what you just experienced. The coalition will never accept this. We'll rebuild, regroup. With what? Jamie's interruption was gentle but devastating. Half your fleet is requesting asylum with our alliance. Your subject species are seeing what's possible when strength comes from unity instead of oppression. Your own people are beginning to ask why they've spent centuries conquering instead of creating. Korath slammed his massive fist on the table, leaving cracks in the metal. So what? You destroy us? Show the galaxy that you're no different from any other conqueror? No. Jamie's voice was infinitely patient. I offer you a choice. The same choice I've offered every species that's joined our alliance. Join us as equals. Contribute your strengths to something greater than yourself. And help build a galaxy where everyone has value. Or ... Or continue as you are and discover that being an apex predator means very little when the environment changes around you. The threat hung in the air between them, not violent, not immediate, but absolute in its implications. Jamie wasn't offering to destroy the coalition, he was showing them that they were already destroying themselves. You're asking me to abandon everything the coalition stands for. I'm asking you to remember what the coalition was supposed to stand for before it became what it is now. Protection of the weak. Order from chaos. Unity through diversity. Jamie's eyes met Korath's directly. Tell me, Admiral, when was the last time the coalition protected someone weaker than itself instead of conquering them? Korath had no answer. The choice is yours, Jamie continued. But understand this. The galaxy is changing. The age of conquest is ending. You can be part of building what comes next, or you can be a relic of what came before. Korath stood slowly, his massive form casting shadows across the room. And if I refuse? If the coalition chooses to fight? Jamie's smile was infinitely sad. Then you'll discover that the smallest cub learned something during his time in the wilderness. He learned that being alpha isn't about being the strongest or the most feared. It's about taking care of the pack. All of it. Even the members who don't fit the traditional mold. You're threatening us. I'm offering you survival. The question is whether your pride will let you take it. Korath moved toward the door, then paused. This isn't over. No, Jamie agreed. It's just beginning. The galaxy is bigger than any of us imagined, Admiral. There's room for everyone, if we're wise enough to make room. As Korath's shuttle departed, Jamie remained at the observation window, watching the Admiral's ship disappear into hyperspace. Around him, the impossible fleet of the Alliance maintained its patient vigil. Beings of light and shadow, matter and energy, dreams and mathematics, all working together towards something the galaxy had never seen. Whisper Song materialized beside him, translucent and beautiful. The coalition will not surrender easily, the telepathic voice observed. No, Jamie replied, but they will adapt. They'll have to. The alternative is extinction, and for all their faults, they're survivors. And if they choose conflict? Jamie's reflections smiled back at him from the viewport. Then they'll learn that evolution isn't optional. The pack either learns to value all its members, or it gets replaced by one that does. Across the galaxy, the news was spreading faster than hyperspace communication. The coalition, invincible, eternal, apex of galactic civilization, had been humbled by an alliance of rejects and cast-offs. Ships that had never known defeat were fleeing from enemies that had never sought conquest. More importantly, they were learning that strength came in forms they'd never imagined, that the smallest voice could carry the greatest wisdom, that the weakest link could become the strongest foundation. The age of packs ruled by alpha predators was ending. The age of communities built on cooperation was beginning. And at its center sat a small, unremarkable human who had failed every traditional test of strength and discovered something far more powerful: the ability to show others their true value. The galaxy would never be the same. Jamie wouldn't have it any other way.